It started with bubbles. Thousands of them, cascading over the edge of my pool like a foamy tidal wave, spilling onto the deck, creeping towards my lawn. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I had left some chlorine tablets in too long, or perhaps there was some freak chemical reaction I didn't know about. But then I saw it, sudsy streaks leading away from the pool, a telltale white residue on the pavement, and a familiar shadow in the security footage. There she was, in all her glory, Karen, the self-appointed dictator of the HOA, dumping an entire box of industrial-strength detergent straight into my pool. A fresh wave of rage boiled inside me as I watched her shake the empty container over the water, ensuring every last grain of soap had dissolved into my once pristine backyard oasis. Then, as if she hadn't just committed an act of suburban terrorism, she strutted away like she'd done the neighborhood a favor. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. This wasn't the first time Karen had overstepped, but this was personal. She had been after me for months, constantly citing bogus HOA violations, despite the fact that my house wasn't even part of the HOA. My crime? Refusing to bow to her ridiculous rules. The wrong shade of patio furniture? Fine. My mailbox wasn't community standard? Another fine. My lawn was too natural? Apparently, having a lawn that wasn't chemically altered into a golf course was an offense. But this time, she had crossed a line. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my murderous thoughts. It was Matt, my best friend and an unfortunate witness to my morning meltdown. He took one look at the foamy disaster and nearly doubled over laughing. "Dude, did you install a hot tub overnight and forget to invite me?" he wheezed, hands on his knees. I glared at him before jabbing a finger at my phone screen. "Karen." His laughter cut off like a switch. He grabbed the phone, squinting at the footage before letting out a low whistle. "Oh, she's really outdone herself this time. Yeah. I'm about 5 seconds away from turning her yard into a swamp." Matt stroked his chin, pretending to consider the idea. A tempting thought. But let's go bigger. I frowned. Bigger. A slow grin spread across his face. "HOA meetings today, right?" I exhaled sharply, my mind already jumping ahead. Karen would be there, basking in her self-imposed authority, dictating her latest demands to the miserable homeowners forced to endure her reign. Maybe she thought she could get away with this because she assumed I wouldn't retaliate. That was her first mistake. By the time we arrived at the community center, the room was already packed. Rows of folding chairs were filled with neighbors, some looking as worn down as prisoners in a never-ending trial, others wearing the forced politeness of people who knew better than to cross Karen. At the front of the room, she stood like a queen addressing her court, her perfectly coiffed blonde bob unmoving despite the ceiling fan whirring overhead. And as I was saying, Karen's voice rang out, "We must enforce stricter visual standards for our community. There have been violations." Her eyes flicked to me with the subtlety of a car alarm. "Some people believe they are above the rules." I raised my hand. "I have a question." Karen sighed, as if already exhausted by my existence. "Yes, Jake." I stood, holding up my phone. "Would you say that dumping industrial-strength detergent into someone's personal property qualifies as a violation?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile didn't falter, but I saw the way her fingers twitched slightly, gripping the clipboard in front of her. "I don't know what you're implying, but if you're referring to that," she waved a dismissive hand, "incident with your pool, I was merely helping to maintain neighborhood cleanliness. You should thank me, really." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my voice level. "I have security footage of you doing it." The murmuring turned into a low chuckle from some of the less HOA-loyal members of the audience. Karen's expression didn't waver, but I saw it, the tiniest flicker of something behind her eyes. Panic? Maybe. "Security footage can be misleading," she said smoothly. "And let's not forget, your pool has been a topic of concern for months. Perhaps this is a sign you should consider redesigning it to better fit community standards." Matt, sitting beside me, muttered under his breath, Oh, she's good. Evil, but good. I exhaled through my nose. So, just to clarify, you think dumping soap into my private pool was justified because you don't like how it looks? Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. I think we should focus on the bigger picture here. I turned to the crowd. Raise your hand if you think Karen is completely full of. All right, that's enough, Karen cut in sharply. If you have an issue, you're welcome to file a complaint through proper channels. Matt snorted. Like you actually process complaints that aren't your own. A few quiet laughs slipped out from the back of the room. Karen straightened, regaining her poise. If there's nothing else, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item. I gritted my teeth. She was getting away with it. Again. But then, as I sat back down, Matt leaned over, eyes glinting with mischief. You know, he murmured, if you drain that pool right, all that soap's gotta go somewhere. I blinked at him, processing the suggestion. Then, slowly, a grin spread across my face. Karen wanted to play dirty? Fine. I could play dirty too. Draining a pool isn't exactly a covert operation, but with the right setup, it can be done smoothly. That's what I told myself as I stood there in the dead of night, staring at the hose snaking from my pool towards Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. Matt crouched beside me, watching the water trickle out, his grin wide and filled with anticipation. I hadn't even started the full drain yet, and already, I could imagine Karen's reaction when she woke up to find her pristine grass drowning in a sea of soapy water. It was poetic justice. It was beautiful. It was also slightly terrifying because if she caught me, she'd turn this into a federal case. The plan was simple. My pool, which had been turned into a bubble factory thanks to Karen's detergent stunt, needed to be emptied anyway. Draining it onto my own lawn wasn't an option unless I wanted my yard to turn into a swamp. So, logically, the next best place was the person responsible for the mess in the first place. My hose was perfectly positioned to release a steady flow of water, not enough to cause immediate alarm but enough to soak deep into the roots of her precious flower beds. The same flower beds she had spent years bragging about, the ones that won her the neighborhood's Best Lawn Award 5 years in a row. Matt nudged me. It's really working. You think she'll notice right away? I smirked. She'll notice when the sun comes up and she steps outside expecting perfection but finds a soap-covered disaster instead. We sat back, letting the plan unfold naturally. The night air was crisp, the quiet hum of the draining water almost meditative. I half expected something to go wrong, for Karen to somehow sense the disturbance in her domain and come storming out of her house like a suburban Sith Lord. But nothing happened. The street remained silent, the houses dark. It was almost too easy. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. It started with the shouting. Loud, screeching, Karen-level shouting that rattled the entire block. I groggily pulled myself out of bed, rubbing my eyes as I made my way to the window. And there she was, standing in the middle of her lawn, arms flailing, her pristine landscape looking less like a professionally maintained paradise and more like an overflowing bubble bath. The foam had spread far beyond what I had anticipated. It wasn't just soaking her grass. It had spilled onto the sidewalk, creeping towards the neighboring houses. Some kids from down the street had already discovered the mess and were gleefully jumping into the thick patches of foam, treating it like a winter wonderland. Matt arrived at my house seconds later, nearly breathless from laughing. "Dude, have you seen it? It's worse than we thought." I followed him outside, and that's when I truly took in the extent of the disaster. The detergent hadn't just soaked into Karen's lawn, it had traveled downhill, pooling into the yards of at least 4 other houses. White suds clung to fences, flower beds, and porches, turning the entire street into a scene straight out of a slapstick comedy. The neighborhood had essentially been turned into a giant bubble party, and Karen was losing her mind in the center of it. I barely had time to process it before she spotted me. Her eyes locked onto mine like heat-seeking missiles, her face an unnatural shade of red. She stormed across the soapy street, slipping slightly but catching herself before she could completely eat pavement. "You!" she shrieked, stabbing